Before I begin my playthrough of Pokemon Colosseum, there's a few things about the game and the series that I feel I need to talk about first. Pokemon Colosseum is a game belonging to the 3rd generation, the Game Boy Advance era that began with Ruby and Sapphire. Pokemon has, to use the all-too-obvious joke, evolved a lot since then, with both moves and battle mechanics getting tweaks every single generation. The ways some aspects of battling worked back in 3rd gen are quite different to what modern-day Pokemon fans might understand. So I thought I'd make this video explaining a few of them. Now, the smaller changes, like moves that have been nerfed or buffed over the later generations, I'm going to talk about those on a case-by-case basis as I get to the videos. But there are a couple of differences in gameplay mechanics that are not only really huge, they're going to be pretty much omnipresent throughout this entire series, so I feel like I need to explain those before we start. So let's take a trip back in time to the days of Pokemon Generation 3. The biggest difference by far that you'll find here is something that also existed in Generation 1 and 2, but Gen 3 seems to be the most notable for it, given that it's only one generation behind the one that changed this. I'm talking about the distinction between physical and special moves. All Pokemon have 2 offensive stats: Attack, which is used for physical moves, and Special Attack, which is used for special moves, and there are also corresponding defense stats to match. Effectively, Pokemon's equivalent of the distinction between physical and magical damage in traditional RPGs. The idea being that physical moves involve things like punching things in the face or kicking them, while special moves involve more fantastical abilities such as shooting fire or water. In more modern Pokemon games, starting with Diamond and Pearl, moves are classified as either physical or special individually based on what the move would logically be. For example, Thunder Punch is physical, while Thunderbolt is special. But this wasn't the case beforehand. Back in Generation 3 and 1 and 2, but we're focusing on 3 here, moves were classified as physical or special purely based on their type. Normal, fighting, flying, ground, rock, bug, ghost, poison, or steel type moves were all physical. Fire, water, grass, ice, electric, dragon, dark, or psychic type moves were all special. The commonly suggested method for remembering this is, if a type has an Eevee evolution, or is dragon, then it's special. Never mind the fact that Leafeon and Glaceon didn't exist before the physical special splits. Also Sylveon. Most people think that if Fairy existed in Gen 3, it would have been special, but that's beside the point. Anyway, Eevee evolution equals special, no Eevee evolution equals physical. Except Dragon. While a simple concept, this change radically alters how some Pokemon play. Pokemon like Alakazam and Gengar frequently use the elemental punches for coverage, as they are all special moves that worked off their higher special attack stats. Meanwhile, Pokemon like Hitmonchan learned all the elemental punches by leveling up, but were absolutely horrible at using them. On the other hand, Shadow Ball was one of the most common moves on physical attacking movesets back in Generation 3. Not only did a large number of physical attackers learn it, but its coverage synergized very well with normal and fighting, 2 other standard physical attacking types. I feel like this change really impacted the special types far more than the physical ones. Most of the originally physical types were generally only physical attackers anyway, and many well-known special moves of those types, like Earth Power, didn't exist in Gen 3 anyway. The special types though, they weren't so lucky. There were quite a lot of water types, for example, with very high attack stats, and they either couldn't make use of their same type attack bonus, or were forced to go mixed just to do so. Dragon being special also hurt a lot, especially since this was the generation that introduced Dragon Dance, one of the absolute arceus sends for physical attacking, but the type that was impacted the most by far was Dark. According to the type chart, all Dark type moves are special in Generation 3. This wasn't so good for a type that mainly consisted of physical attackers. The real irony here though is that after the physical special split, there was only one special Dark type move, And it was one that wasn't even introduced in Gen 3. Yes, that's right. Every dark move that existed in Gen 3 became physical in Gen 4. I'm saying this because Colosseum has quite a few available Dark-type Pokemon, and almost all of them are Pokemon that were much better off after the physical special split in Gen 4. There was one physical type that was in the same kind of predicament though, Ghost. Almost all Ghost-type Pokemon that existed in Generation 3 were special attackers. Ghost being a physical type means that although many of them learned Shadow Ball, very few of them could use it effectively. The only Ghost type that really liked physical Shadow Ball was Banette, and Banette wasn't really all that good anyway. You'll be seeing quite a few Ghost types in Colosseum use Shadow Ball, and more often than not, it'll usually do pathetic damage. So as counterintuitive as it may seem to anyone used to later Pokemon generations, always teach Shadow Ball to physical attackers, never to actual Ghost types. That's all I wanted to say about the physical special split, the first of two major gameplay changes that I wanted to discuss. The second involves the way that double battles work. This is very important, as Colosseum is entirely double battles. This method of battling was first introduced in Generation 3, if you don't count Jesse and James accidentally inventing it in the early anime. But one aspect of it was changed pretty heavily in Generation 4, and it was kept that way in every generation since. This relates to when fainted Pokemon are replaced. So, here's how things go in the 3rd gen. We've got a hypothetical double battle going, and one Pokemon attacks an opposing Pokemon and knocks it out. What happens? Well, in Generation 3, the trainer has to replace it with another Pokemon from their party immediately. This replacement is sent in while the turn is still ongoing, which means that if another Pokemon targeted that same slot in the same turn, the replacement will take a hit the moment that it comes in, which could mean that it's also KO'd. In Generation 4 and beyond, however, fainted Pokemon aren't replaced until the end of the turn, meaning that anything that went on during that turn can't affect them. Any attacks that were directed into that slot will instead fail outright with the message, "but there was no target." If you're playing Colosseum, you should definitely be aware of how this works in Generation 3, because let's just say that this game features some Pokemon that you really don't want to knock out, meaning that if you're not careful with how you target your attacks, a Pokemon that, let's just say, is of the variety that you don't want to KO might end up coming in only to immediately get one-shotted by either you or friendly fire from its partner's spread moves. So be very careful not to misjudge your own Pokemon's strength when double targeting a slot, or else you could end up taking out more than you wanted. Those were the two major gameplay differences that I wanted to discuss. Here's a couple of others that I feel will probably crop up enough that it's worth giving them their own time. One other aspect that was changed to the relief of many in future generations but is not present in this game doesn't really relate to the battle gameplay, but it's the fact that TMs are one use only. So if you get a rare TM in this game, be very careful who you teach it to, because you probably won't get another one. Some TMs in this game can be bought infinitely though, whether with money or with poker coupon prizes from battles. So, all is not lost. There are a total of 50 TMs in Generation 3, some of them are not available in Colosseum at all. If one of them isn't, I'll be excluding it from my bios when it comes to mentioning notable TM moves. Electric types are not immune to paralysis in this gen. Similarly, grass types are not immune to powder moves. Confused Pokemon hurt themselves 50% of the time instead of 33% of the time. Self-destruct and explosion calculate their damage based on half of the target's defense stat, meaning they effectively have double the power they're listed as having in the game. Sturdy does not act like a pseudo-focus sash the way it does in Gen 5 and on. All it does is block one-hit KO moves like Fissure or Guillotine. Surf doesn't hit your partner in Generation 3, it only hits both opponents. Critical hits deal double damage in this generation, not 1.5 times as it's been ever since Gen 6. They still ignore defense boosts though. that should be everything I want to talk about here. There are a few other minor changes, like I said, but I'll go into those on a case-by-case basis. With that done, I hope to see you for the start of my Colosseum series.